going to get rolling here.
Sounds great.
So just welcome to everybody to this webinar from Ahead. We definitely appreciate everyone making the time for us today. We have feel like a really exciting topic I think everyone is interested in around FinOps for enterprise IT. In ways of introductions, my name is Clint Babcock. I am based in Michigan. I am an EVP here at Ahead covering our sales organization. Susannah?
And I'm Susannah Warfield. I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee, and I run the financial consulting division within Ahead. It's nice to have you all here today.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be covering today. And I feel like FinOps in general has become a little bit of a buzz term that we're starting to hear quite a bit about. But that being said, I feel like it's something that's very, very important to our customers, specifically in regards to the economic landscape that we're all living in right now. And frankly, it's probably just starting to kind of get going here. So I think we have to start being more creative about how we optimize our spend and how we find optimization opportunities. So for this conversation, we at Ahead wanted to take that head on. So we wanted to give you our opinion, and I think in a very just forward way. So for this agenda, we want to talk to you just a little bit about what FinOps is, just what the perception is from the field. But we also want to give you our approach, like what's our methodology, what's our worldview on FinOps for enterprise IT. We want to walk you through exactly what our offerings are in this space. And then we want to give you a couple examples on real world customers that we've worked with on different angles of it, just for you to better understand how Ahead can help. And then last but not least, how do you engage? So if you decide you walk out of this meeting and you like what you hear, how do you get the Ahead and team engaged on doing FinOps for enterprise IT?
Awesome. Thank you, Clint. I'll jump into it. As Clint mentioned, it's really a cloud specific term in the market today. And it's one that was really born from the reality that, the cloud model itself really took the governance and data and oversight that once existed in a traditional procurement organization and really shared that with the edge. And a lot more individuals are now involved in those processes. So how do we kind of centralize that and promote a culture of collaboration and increase financial transparency? That's really the bread and butter of FinOps specifically. And we're having multiple conversations with executives every day around FinOps. And I think the theme that we're seeing throughout is that given where we are with the economic conditions, projects that aren't specifically tied to an optimization play or don't have a rock solid KPI, those projects are not getting pushed through in 2023. So it's never been more timely to sort of have this methodology in place. The good news from an Ahead perspective is that we've kind of always applied that monetary lens to our technical recommendation. I came from IT finance, and I always like to say, my background is one where my role was to candidly kind of pick apart the proposals that partners and manufacturers would bring. And that's not to say that there wasn't a lot of, really good data included in those proposals. It just wasn't necessarily specific to our accounting policies and asset life cycles and whatnot. So we would spend a lot of time repackaging, those proposals up, making sense of them, and then ultimately taking them to the board. So that's the lens that we try to put on in parallel with our technical recommendation whenever we engage with clients. And then, of equal importance is kind of the people and process aspect. If you're going to move from strategy A to strategy B, we need to ensure that the right people and processes are in place to A, make that shift, but B, to realize the KPIs that we've sort of promised on the front end longer term. So all that's to say, this is something that Ahead has been doing for a really long time. I think, as I mentioned, the timing is key, and that, we've never been better positioned to kind of meet the needs of our clients today. But we've packaged everything that we've been doing into what we're calling FinOps for enterprise IT. So irrespective of where our clients are in their cloud journey, we believe that same methodology and lens should be applied to optimize spend for our clients. And really, we've kind of summarized all of those offerings into this matrix. So moving from left to right, we really have foundational financial analysis, which is a high level cost comparison of strategy A to strategy B. You can think, comparing tools or looking at, technology A or B, specific to a certain project. We've done that for years. As I mentioned, lead the financial consulting division. You can kind of think of that offering as our foundational offering on steroids, in that, we're going to go down to the individual asset level, down to the contract level, and build out a multi-year financial profile, assuming that our clients change nothing about the strategy. And really those financial models are used in, large transformational initiatives, really meant to highlight, the financial implication of making a broad change in strategy. And I'll talk more about that here in just a second. We've got IT asset management. That's our ServiceNow offering, really understanding that there is, financial benefit of having the right assets in the right hands at the right time. We're probably doing, I would say, probably 4 or 5 workload optimization discussions with clients in a given week. And that's where clients are really looking to optimize, where should an application live? Should it be on-prem? Should it be private cloud, public cloud? And so that's where we're marrying our technical work streams with financial consulting to, again, put that monetary, technical, and people and process lens in place to say, here's where we recommend these applications go. And then lastly, we have FinOps as a service for cloud. That really is our pure cloud offering. So when you think about FinOps as a cloud specific term in the market, you think governance and tagging and cloud centers of excellence, things, intended to, again, centralize and optimize cloud spend. We have point in time solutions where we can come in and do, a cloud health check and help clients kind of, optimize what they're already doing. And then we have a fully managed solution where we can take on those roles and responsibilities on behalf of our clients and really help, execute on the backlog of optimization opportunities. More recently, and one of the use cases that I'll step through here in just a second, we've married financial consulting with our FinOps as a service for cloud to do some really interesting things around cloud forecasting. I know that's another theme that we're hearing from clients is it's really hard to predict. You can extrapolate and you can trend cloud costs, but how do we really predict cloud spend as it relates to key business drivers, revenue, headcount, et cetera? So doing some really interesting things around that front as well. And I'll get into specifics around that in just a second. But diving back into pillar 2, which is financial consulting, which is my organization, the process is always the same and the goal is always the same, irrespective of what we're trying to work with our clients to solve. The goal is always, as I mentioned, to increase financial transparency and help optimize every dollar spent. And then the goal is always to enable key business outcomes and run in parallel with our technical teams. It's a cyclical process, but we always start in what we call the baseline financial profile phase, where we're going out and creating a, by asset, by contract, by category, multi-year view, provided that the client does not change anything about the strategy. Incorporating existing trends, IT roadmap, personnel, really getting as granular as we possibly can on that profile and making sure that it's accurate. And we iterate on this with clients until the point where we all, can nod in agreement that this is as accurate a representation of current state as possible. And the reason this is so critical is if we get this part wrong, obviously any KPI or savings metric that we position from that point forward is essentially useless. So again, kind of going back to my IT finance background, making sure that that is tailored to our client specific environment is really important. The goal is to have that financial profile locked down by the time our technical recommendation is ready. So we start to incorporate whatever that may be it data center optimization, cloud optimization, what have you. And we can create side-by-side financial profiles, timing considered, what assets are impacted, when are they impacted, what transformational costs are required, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately, move into that transformational phase, which is what is the strategy impact analysis? Are there specific levers that we can pull to optimize the actual execution of the strategy? So Ahead has a dedicated team of people that, do buying solutions, layering strategic agreements on top to either downshift the price point of the solution or to marry cash flows with the business value associated with that technology. The result is that we have these, really robust budgeting and forecasting tools. So hopefully we've, created a business case for the specific initiative that we've been hired, to analyze. But now we have this kind of single repository of all things financial that clients are using for budgeting, forecasting, chargebacks, showbacks, et cetera. And really, those documents become the property of our clients. They can be maintained over time. A lot of clients are keeping us kind of on retainer to maintain those files over time. We have others that are, doing managed FinOps, so to speak, but we can certainly enable clients to maintain them on their own if that's the route they choose to go. Common use cases. There are certain times where, my organization specifically is brought in to just do kind of a financial transparency engagement. Perhaps the client doesn't have a centralized view of enterprise IT spend, or they're trying to get from a categorical spend profile, which would be, tracking cost at the storage network compute level, but they want to break it down by business unit or application. So we're brought in to do those sorts of financial models all the time, usually in conjunction with a larger transformational initiative, but we can certainly run, as a standalone effort. I'd say 9 times out of 10, we're doing, that next section, which is, a client is looking at data center consolidation. What is the financial impact of that? Lots of M&A clients are coming to us and asking, for that particular engagement. Workload optimization, as I mentioned, figuring out what is the right placement for different applications given the technical and financial profile. And then we're doing a lot of cloud strategy analysis. So clients moving from on-prem to cloud, or even clients that are trying to repatriate workloads, what is the economic impact of those shifts? So that's something our team does on a regular basis. And then, as I mentioned, predictive cloud modeling, and I'll get into specifics around that in just a second. We've developed a lot of IP along the way. So from a baseline financial model perspective, we develop guiding principles specific to each client to really hone in on exactly what it is they want to see, create, document everything so that every person within that client's organization can come in and know what were the data sources, what were the, key performance drivers that we've included, what were, who signed off on it. All of those things are very clearly documented, and there are dynamic cells. So if we want to change the growth rate or the inflation rate, et cetera, those are dynamically input as well. A really key distinction from my perspective is that we are looking and building the views similar to what you see in the bottom left of your screen. We're building those based on a cash flow model. And we do that for a really specific reason, which is, a client can choose to make a change tomorrow. The example I always give is you can move an application from on-prem to the cloud, but you're not necessarily going to see the economic impact of that change because perhaps it's on shared infrastructure today, or there's remaining contracted spend and you can't really make an adjustment until the next, call it, event from a cash flow perspective. So for an asset, you could downsize the config and achieve some savings there, or you could renegotiate the contract. So our primary views are always taken from a cash flow perspective, but we do have accounting schedules running in the background with depreciation and amortization as a to inform, schedule for our clients, so that we're kind of constantly keeping an eye on, assets that need to be repurposed or those that would be accelerated in the event of a change. From a future state tool, that's really specific on whatever the client is looking to achieve. Again, we're trying to customize our deliverables to make, their lives as easy as possible, but we can do side-by-side multi-year views. We can do, sliders where you could accelerate or decelerate a migration and see how the economics change, before and after snapshots by business unit, by application, those sorts of things. And then the predictive cloud model we'll get into in just a second. But I think the overall theme here is that, because we've been doing this for a long time, we've been able to kind of hone and refine our methodology and our deliverables while still kind of meeting the customizations of the client to make sure that they're getting exactly what they need. So with that, I'm going to walk through the first sample deliverable. This one is specific to workload optimization. We were really brought in because this particular client did not have a CMDB. They did not have a centralized repository of financial data, and they had recently sold an existing data center that had a significant amount of technical debt. So we were brought in to help them solidify the strategy. Where were the workloads going to go? Were we recommending that they go to a colo, go to private cloud or public cloud? And so the first part of the engagement was really to come in and solidify that strategy. We have since moved into phases 3, 4, and 5, where we're actually standing up the landing zones and helping this particular client migrate. But what I'm about to show you is really specific to phases 1 and 2. So again, marrying the technical and financial work streams, we had a lot going on in the background. We had teams interviewing, application stakeholders to really understand what are those applications being used for today? What are the end users getting from those applications? Are there specific technical requirements that need to be maintained irrespective of where they end up going? In the background, we were also running a tool called Cloudscape, which gave us application dependency mapping, which allowed us to kind of define, which applications needed to move together, et cetera. And all of that due diligence really culminated in this slide. Obviously, tons and tons of detail behind this, but the summary slide or the punchline slide was this one, which was of the 284 parent applications. So we kind of grouped them in parents, knowing that they would move together. Of the 284 parent applications that were on-prem in this existing data center, 17 we're going to go to a colo, 137 we're going to go to private cloud, and 130 we're going to go to public cloud. And my team's specific charter was to put a financial lens to this slide. So if you think back to the methodology slide just a few moments ago, we needed to go out and we needed to create the baseline financial profile for discovered state. And then we needed to break down, that cost by application. So using some of the data, performance data coming out of the Cloudscape tool, we were able to provide a weighting to each application and therefore break apart, the storage and network profiles that we'd created in the baseline, and ultimately determine, what is the implication of these dispositions. So this was the baseline financial profile. Again, all individual asset detail, all the contract detail pulled into multiple views, but ultimately summarized, in this particular one. And this is really, while it's an executive summary slide, it's one that we often start with. So when we ingest the client's financial data, we put it into our models and we come back with a first pass similar to this one. And what we found is it's really a good way to identify if there's any sort of data collection gap, or if we've got to adjust any of our, guiding principles related to trends, because you have basically a singular view that gives you, a 5-year total or whatever time frame we're looking at, but in this case, 5 years, CapEx, OpEx. Does that mix feel correct? Or looking at the individual categories over a multi-year period, do those trends feel correct? And we can look at it, and drill down and determine if there's anything that needs to be adjusted. But again, this is what we want to solidify before we make any sort of future state, recommendation or start to adjust the financials. So we, solidified this baseline financial model. This particular client was projected to spend $377 million over the 5-year period. And then based on, the technical recommendation of where these applications were going to land, one of 3 methodologies kicked on from a financial perspective. So again, we've got the application weightings. We can break apart those cost profiles that you saw on the prior slide. But if it was going to go to a colo, kind of the financial profile maps over, with the exception of data center fees get replaced by colocation fees. For private cloud specifically, we ran an RFP. We knew what the associated infrastructure as a service costs were going to be, and we could basically, replace the on-prem cost profile with those fees and then add back some of the items that would persist. And then for public cloud specifically, the tool gave us comparative cloud pricing. So if an application was designated to go to the cloud, we again looked at it from a technical and financial perspective to figure out which was the best cloud provider for this particular workload and loaded that into the model. So once we had all of that basically aggregated, we could start to tell the story. And again, using the client's feedback to really hone in on what was the message that they wanted to tell, but hone in on, what it is that they were trying to relay to their executive team. So the chart to the right really started to tell the story of progress from a cloud perspective. Everything was on-prem today. They had a cloud first initiative, but they were also a healthcare company. So knowing that not everything was going to be able to move to the cloud day one, was understood, but needing to tell the story of we are making progress and shifting things, towards a cloud first strategy. So this graphic on the right, you can see, what is the percentage of the application set that's going to each, call it landing zone, versus the percentage of servers versus cost. So you can see there's, a small percentage of the application set that was going to remain on-prem, but a really large proportion of the cost. So you start to tell the story of tier one applications that need to stay on-prem, but really, again, the goal was to tell the story of progress. Then you could tell it from a cost perspective. So of the applications going to a colo, what were they costing on-prem versus future state? And you can step that, all the way across. The punchline of this particular slide was, again, the baseline profile was 377 million. The recommended future state was 360 million. So going to pull, roughly $17 million out of the business over the multi-year period. And that culminated in this executive slide. So again, detailing, what are the economic implications of the strategy? We had not yet factored in any savings from, application rationalization. So that was going to be additive to the numbers that we were showing. But again, detailing, the guiding principles and main themes from a financial perspective, while layering in all the operational benefits that would result from a technical perspective. So had a lot of, good conversations with the executive team around this one. The final step is obviously, if the client signs off on the recommended strategy, what do they need to go ask for from a budget perspective? So that's, again, where we walk that $377 million agreed upon baseline financial profile and start to walk in the things that are required to execute the strategy. So transformational costs like professional services, swing gear, ramp assumptions associated with IaaS and private cloud. And then we start to back out the things that we got line of sight to along the way in terms of optimization plays. So the other sort of byproduct of all of this work is that when you have everything centralized and you've got these models, you can see, duplicative tools. You can see instances where you can consolidate your buying power with particular manufacturers, cloud commitments, marketplace. All of those things are really forefront in our financial models, and we can start to project, optimization opportunities that would result from executing on those recommendations. And the net down in the yellow is the client has, by year, by CapEx and OpEx, what is the budgetary requirement, that is needed to execute this strategy. So that's kind of this one from start to finish. The next one was, a pure cloud assessment. So the client wanted to do a full lift and shift to cloud, but the message from the board was, we're not sure that cloud is financially viable. Can you go back and do due diligence to show us, that at a minimum, it would be cost neutral to the business. So again, same baseline financial profile. This particular client wanted a 10-year view. They had certain projects running for the next several years that would delay migration. So aligning to their, project schedule and a realistic migration timeline, we built the financials accordingly. So built, again, a multi-year baseline financial profile by category, got consensus from the client that this was an accurate representation of their existing strategy, and then started to ingest, the go forward recommendation. So we ran cloud native tools, understood the profile from a future state perspective, and then started to walk ourselves back with, okay, what is the actual, process and change that is needed to go from A to B? So we told, the accounting story. So how does the CapEx and OpEx mix shift as a result of migrating to cloud? What is the categorical change that's required? So that's looking at, the Microsoft EA, storage, network compute, et cetera, and manually adjusting, not manually adjusting, but granularly adjusting each profile accordingly, given the technical profile and recommendation of what was going to change and when, so that the client could better forecast and project, that outcome. So the net of it all was, a small savings over the period of time, which again, our charter was, can you just show us reality? We aren't yet sure what this strategy is going to mean for the business. We know from a functionality and services perspective that we're going to get a lot from a cloud solution, but we need to tell the financial story as well. So we married those two things together to really create a business impact analysis for this client. And then the last one, if you think back to the matrix of FinOps for enterprise IT offerings, this is the cloud specific offering. So we had a client that approached us really with two distinct offerings or asks. One was, can you come in and analyze our existing cloud environment today and look for optimization opportunities? So again, we have a team of folks really laser focused on this particular initiative. They use a variety of tools to go out and analyze a client's cloud environment, but looking for things like tagging, resource optimization, reserved instances, budget flows, really things that could be immediately impactful to the client. So we had a technical workstream component. And then my team was involved from a financial workstream perspective, which was they really didn't have, while they were really good at tagging, they didn't have a centralized view of who was consuming what. And there were a couple reasons for that. And I'll get into that in just a second. But the bigger ask was, if we gave you our revenue forecast or headcount forecast, could you project cloud spend based on those metrics? So we went out and we built a regression model to handle that. First, let's talk about the results of the technical work stream. So again, our resources went out, analyzed this particular cloud environment, tons and tons of detail behind this slide. But ultimately, we came up with this scorecard. So you have each individual category listed on the left, how this particular client scored, some details around our findings, estimated savings potential, and then what do you need to do to actually go and implement these changes. So we were kind of reporting on this in real time, knowing that this information was valuable immediately. So as we uncovered things, passing that information back to the client to let them, act on those recommendations in real time while continuing the financial work stream. So we have a tool, we have the ability to ingest, hundreds of thousands of line item CSV export from a particular cloud provider and essentially summarize it in a way that's meaningful for our clients. So looking at, tagging strategies and looking at reserved instances and being able to push that spend, which is typically held above the line, back down to the business units consuming it in a repeatable and automated way. So with that in mind, we ingested the last 12 months of cloud spend for this particular client and created this view, which is, by business unit, who is consuming what from a prod, dev, shared services perspective. And this was really the first time that they'd gotten a good view of this particular breakdown, all the while marrying it with their revenue forecast. So were cloud spends directly tied to revenue is kind of the theme of the engagement. Next, we basically took that data and we were able to do some scenario testing. So given that we had revenue, payment volume, headcount information historically and forward-looking, was there a predictive relationship between cloud costs and those variables? And what we found was, each, and this is not necessarily surprising, each application or business unit behaved differently. So, throughout this analysis, we found that there were certain things that had predictive relationships in one business unit that didn't have a predictive relationship in another. So for business unit A, as an example, the predictive value was revenue. We could pretty accurately depict or forecast revenue based on, or predict cloud costs based on the revenue forecast. For the second business unit, it was payment volumes. So within a really good margin of error, we could predict cloud costs based on volumes. And then for shared services, not surprisingly, it was headcount. So modeling each of these business units independently and then bringing those regression models together, we were able to give the client a forward-looking forecast for cloud spend by business unit, prod, non-prod, shared services, et cetera. Right now, that model has a plus or minus 10% margin of error. That will continue to shrink because we only had a limited amount of observations or months of data. We couldn't fine tune as best we could, those variables. We are now scoping a managed FinOps contract with this particular client with the goal to, in real time, continue the technical analysis and optimization efforts that we did in the one-time assessment, while also tweaking and refining the regression models that will allow us to project, cloud costs with smaller and smaller margins of error. But again, this was the first time, that they'd been able to do that. And it really summarizes, you can look at it in a way where you could bring on additional headcount and we could project, what that person would drive from a shared services cloud cost perspective. Or if you're bringing on a contract and it has X number of revenue, we expect this amount of cloud spend. So really predictive and really interesting work came out of this particular engagement type. And again, looking at it by business unit in aggregate or being able to break it down. And the interesting conversation that ensued was, one business unit moved pretty cleanly with the revenue forecast, the other not so much. So some interesting conversations around, do we need to reprice our services, or what's going on in business unit A versus business unit B to better have those variables aligned. So great conversations had with this particular client. Again, ongoing efforts, but just another example of how we're continuing to evolve our FinOps for enterprise IT offerings to meet, specific needs of the client. So with that, Clint, I think I will pass it back to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So we've gone through examples, we've gone through our methodology. So what I really want to talk about now is, how do you get engaged with the head if this is something of interest? And I think first and foremost, it's important to understand, what do we do end to end? And I think sometimes we talk to clients and, it's either you do data center, you do cloud or whatever. But I think what we understand is if you're going to do something like a application rationalization or optimization opportunity, we understand that there's going to be a ripple effect across your ecosystem to go do these things. So we've built practices within a head to go execute from end to end. And obviously our financial component of it is very, very important, which is obviously why we're having a conversation today. But maybe just take a second to look here, and hopefully you'll understand that when we come in and do this evaluation for you, we help you go build out your business justification documentation that most of our customers, especially right now, need to get a project approved. It's important to look at things holistically. And that's exactly what we do here. I'm good with this. So something that we provide our customers that helps with this evaluation, if you want to engage with us, is our engagement framework. So it's a 6-step process that provides quality and consistency on any engagement that we work on. So if you walk out of this meeting and you go to your local head client director or your technical resource and say, I'm interested in looking at a cloud engagement, or I'm interested in looking at FinOps for my environment, these are the steps that we would follow to make sure that we execute. I just want to spend a couple seconds on each one of them just to explain how this would fit in. So the first step that we would follow is discover, which would mean that we would come in with an agenda to work with you on exactly what your requirements are and your desired outcome is for this engagement. So as an example, like Susannah mentioned, if the customer wanted to get out of a data center, or if they want to move applications to the cloud, obviously that would be what we would be talking about in this discover phase and identify those requirements. The second step we would do is we want to understand the baseline of what you have in your environment today. So we have a lot of different ways that we can do this. We have assessment tools. This might be manual interviews. There's a lot of things we can do here, but we have to understand what you have today before we can make a recommendation on anything. The document component of it is that we would want to review those findings with you on exactly what we captured in that assessment phase. But more importantly, if we were looking at doing something like a cloud move, we'd also want to make sure that you understand, obviously, the financials, but understand, how does security play in? How does network fit in? How does automation fit in? Who's going to be using the cloud? So we want to look at things holistically for you. So you're making sure that if we're going to make a recommendation based on cost savings, that we've looked at every aspect of the engagement that could be in play. And then we're getting to the financial analysis, which is really kind of what we covered today. When I talk to IT leaders, this is probably the aspect where they struggle the most with, because you have to have a solid business case if you're going to get something moved through, or specifically if you need to get a project that's not in the budget approved. So hopefully throughout this presentation, you see that we dot I's and cross T's, but we want to make sure that it's a firm number. And not only can we look at technology, we can also look at people and process as a part of this evaluation for financial analysis. Once the financial analysis is completed, then ahead we'll come back with recommendations on what we think you should do. And again, throughout this presentation, we've shown you some of those examples. This could be anything from, different services that we can provide. This could be doing it yourself versus managed services. This could be certain product sets, but this could be a very elaborate recommendation. And we come back with scorecarding, we come back with demos, we have a full lab, a lot of ways that we help you validate that whatever we're recommending is the right solution for you. And then last but not least, the execution plan. We want to make sure that you have a very concrete way of what the implementation of the solution is going to look like, or the services. Not only that, we want to look at day 2 support. So are we going to do training? Do you have the staff to go ahead and support this moving forward? So do we want to look at something like a managed services, or do we need to train your staff to go ahead and execute on this? So that's what the engagement framework really entails. If we go to the next slide. this is the type of documentation that we would provide back. So we would give you something that would be customized to you. We would market it to you in regards to your color scheme and your marketing. But what we want to make sure at the end of our engagement, if you allow us to come in and run our framework, we would give you a business justification document that we feel confident you can go right to the business with to say, this is why we think this project should get approved. And the customers that allow us to follow this process have had a lot of success. But we will do this on any engagement that you engage with us, even obviously the FinOps component that we're talking about today. I'm okay here. So just in closing, and then, if you wouldn't mind that, I did send a note out. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit those in the Q&A section. We'd definitely like to get those answered for you. But to close out here from our end, the first step we would, hopefully you would take here is just contact your local head team. If you don't know who your person is, obviously you can reach out to Susannah or myself over LinkedIn, or, we'll have our contact information. But once you do that, provide them an overview of what you're trying to accomplish. What about FinOps or anything else are you interested in? So we at least can start formulating what a conversation would look like. And then lastly, the reason why I wanted to talk about the engagement framework is that we would like to follow it for this. So if you decide you come out of this meeting and you say, I am interested in FinOps, here's what I would like to talk about. We would kick off that first step of the engagement framework, which is discover. So we would come in, we'd set an agenda. We would make sure we get the proper SMEs within a head to come in and have the conversation with you. You'd bring your team, and then we'd have a conversation. We'd talk about why we're capable in this space. We talk about our methodology, but more importantly, we talk about your concerns and your problems, and we help you go create a roadmap on how to go see value in that. So while I get this teed up here, we do have a couple questions. I would like to ask you one so I can get kind of prepped for this. When we go through this process of doing FinOps or going through your piece of it, how long does that typically take, and what's the lift on the customer's end to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's really dependent more on kind of the state of the client's financial data than the size of the environment. We have some clients, that can push a button and give us a fixed asset report or an operational spend report. And that's really what we need to kind of get that first pass back to them. Other clients don't have that. And so we're kind of aggregating cost profiles from different areas of the business, and it just takes a little bit longer. But I'd say on average, to create the financial baseline, ingest the technical recommendation, and then obviously do the cost comparison at the end, I'd say it's about 8 to 10 weeks. And we would define kind of all that process and timeline in a statement of work with the client.
So thank you for that. And I just would throw that out there that, just the time that it would take internally to go run this process and not have the firm numbers. So I know it's 8 to 10 weeks, but, we feel like this is something that's the time well spent. So one other question we do have in the chat here is, in the cloud cost focus scenario, do you typically gain access to the client's environment and build out models reporting, or do you typically require a time investment from the client to walk through the reporting? And if so, how much time is needed from the client typically to do that?
Yeah. So for this particular client, we got access to their billing profile. So we could go in and extract, what we needed from a financial workstream perspective to do what we need to do. And then our technical resources had the same access, and then they could go in and kind of do some analytics and read-only access within a couple of the tools. So we had some on the technical side of the house. I know there were several workshops, with people to really understand the tagging strategy and how our budget flow is working today, and really understand, where they are, so that we could tailor our efforts accordingly. So, it brings up a good point of some clients have folks working on cloud cost optimization or even financial consulting in-house, but they have a lot going on. So we can either help those resources move faster, or we can augment in places that they're not focused. But it wasn't, I'd say there were probably maybe 3 or 4 hour-long-ish workshops with the client to really understand what they were doing. And then we were doing all the analysis on the back end to recommend tagging and resource types and reserved instances, et cetera. So the goal is always to take as much of that off the client as we can. But obviously there's some level of understanding that needs to be established so that we know exactly how things are operating and working today.
So one other follow-up here too is, we talked a lot about technology, if it's either like data center products or if it's cloud. But like, what else are we able to evaluate in regards to this process? Like, isn't, people is a big piece of it. Most of our clients are struggling recruiting talent, and then they have their A players that they have, and just trying to make sure that they're working on high value add tasks.
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about, maybe as a part of this engagement, how we can also look at the people aspect of it, about how they
Yeah, we can. So, from a financial consulting perspective, we put it in or don't put it in at the recommendation of the client. Obviously, it's always a consideration and always something we're running, but there are times where the client is just going to shift resources around or reskill, so we can capture that cost below the line. Personnel's can be fairly political, but we capture teams of people, what they're working on, how much of their time is spent keeping the lights on versus revenue generating tasks, and then we can assess kind of what is the mix of skills needed in future state, and what's the delta that we need to get from point A to point B. And then we've got, resources that work on technology enablement. So organizational change management, value stream mapping, all the things that kind of have the end user and the people piece in mind. We have those work streams running in parallel most of the time as well.
So maybe like a broader question I think is important is, like, when you're working, because you're on the financial side, you're not an engineer by trade.
No.
Yeah. And so neither am I, but why is it critical that you have a strong supporting cast when you're getting this information? Because I think that is something that, as much as FinOps is out there, there might be organizations that focus on FinOps, but if the data coming into the FinOps team isn't accurate because they don't have the proper technical talent to give them that information, I mean, I could see that this could fall apart quickly.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, there are a lot of tools out there that do really great things, from a cost comparison perspective. I think the niche that my team falls into specifically is that, we customize it to the client. So we're not using industry standard data unless we need to default to that because it's not available. But we're looking at it from a timing perspective. So, when a technical team feeds me a recommended strategy, we can go in and say, this contract is impacted. Here's how it's impacted. You need, X fewer licenses in this agreement. It's up for renewal in 2 years. We start to model things from a very granular perspective. I am not technical to make those determinations. So if we have a, config that's going to replace, a certain portion of the environment, I need guidance as to, it's replacing assets 1, 2, 3, 4, and here's the migration timeline. So we get really specific, both from a financial and technical recommendation. My team can model whatever we need to with the data that we have in hand. We just need that real world lens of technical expertise to kind of bring it to life, so to speak.
Yeah, I think, just for people that are out there, I think that's one of the pieces that we want you to walk away with about ahead is, I think this is a big differentiator for us. I'm not trying to make this a pitch, but I think it's important, is that we come in and understand your environment. That's why we talk about doing assessments and whatnot. So we can capture that data. We can work with Susannah's team to understand the financial models. But when you actually do need to make a recommendation on what you do to get a cost comparison, we also build out those configurations, or can help you with the moving workloads in the cloud, or help you identify a colo provider, do the consulting services to move workloads, whatever it needs to be. So the numbers we're providing are very, very accurate, because we're looking at this thing throughout the whole life cycle, which I think is unique, because as a lot of our, some of our competition, the guys be candid, is some of the bigger systems integrators, and they'll say, here's what we do, but they're not giving you recommendations on exactly like how to replace or how to improve. Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure we call that out. One other question that I have is, you talked about reporting tools that we use. We have tooling that we capture this and we can show to our clients. What does it, maybe a little more about what it includes, and then why would someone want ahead to do more of an ongoing support with that tooling? What are some of the add-on benefits? Because I can see you, once you get the data, what do you do with it? You might do an initial cleanup of the environment, but why would they want to continue to possibly have that information and keep it relevant?
Yeah, sure. So I handle that question in 2 parts. I mean, the first is, we have a wide variety of tools that we use from a data collection standpoint. Depending on the situation, we use, from a cloud perspective, Cloud Checker, Harness, all the native cloud tools. There are some data collection engines from a financial perspective that we've looked into. from a deliverable standpoint, we tend to focus and stay within Excel and Power BI. And that's really to enable our clients to make customizations along the way and really drill in where they need to. Having the background that I have, I want to be able to enable our clients to maintain the files if that's what they choose to do, but also give them the flexibility to import data sets and do those sorts of things. So with that level of customization in mind, the financial models themselves are all Excel based today. With regard to part 2 of your question, I think the reason, you want us to stay involved and going back to when I was on, the client side, we would position projects with KPIs and savings metrics, and we would send those projects to the board. And then we didn't really go back and check them. So, well, great, we're going to save 20%. We're going to self-fund this other project that we really need to do, but we didn't really go back and do a health check after the fact. And so I think another unique, differentiator for AHEAD is that we have the ability to recommend and execute. And if you keep the financial work stream running in parallel, through that execution phase, we can do, and it was on kind of the process slide, the periodic health checks, like how are we doing as it, in terms of the original KPIs that we promised associated with this project? Do we need to course correct, or is there something that's now come to light where we can actually enhance upon that KPI, a different savings initiative, et cetera. So being, in partnership with our clients throughout the whole process allows us to really tweak and refine and report back, on our original KPIs or adjusted KPIs for that matter.
So one last question here, then, again, I sent a note out just if anyone else has a question, please, feel free to throw that in the Q&A. But when you've completed your documentation and your report, once you've validated it with the teams that you're working with, and then they go and are going for approval to get their project approved, have you seen that accelerated based on the documentation you've provided, just, because they have the information that they need? I mean, I'd be curious, because I think anyone who's working within IT, or even if you're one of our technology partners, there has to be a level of approval that has to happen. I'd be curious to see if this accelerates that or not.
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. Again, the goal is to, when you get to the executive conversation, you want to have had multiple conversations along the way so that we're not presenting numbers or findings for the first time. We want everybody in the room to be able to, look at each other and smile and nod that we're comfortable with the data we've used to build these financial models, the assumptions, the technical recommendation, the people process implications, like it all comes together, but it's not the first time that you've seen it. Or that they've seen it. So that's kind of the partnership and collaboration along the way. But again, going back to my background yet again, but once we hand something over, we've worked in parallel. So there's not this pause where, their internal finance teams need to go validate and do their own due diligence. Like that's already been done. So that's really the goal from that perspective.
So we did have a question come in. How might an org who has a low level of maturity in the 5 pillars of FinOps you described engage AHEAD to build processes that might be handed off to and managed by the org? And then what might that look like from AHEAD standpoint? Maybe one thing to jump in first with that is we do offer, as a part of our process, that we're big believers in creating roadmaps for our clients. And that starts with creating baselines on whatever it might be. So, I know we're talking about certain areas, but we can do that across, if that's security, if that's your data center, if that's cloud, if that's how you're doing app development, it doesn't really make a difference. But we can show you like what the levels of maturity are in more of like a crawl, walk, run scenario. So that's something that we do consistently. And to kick this off, someone like Susannah would need that information anyways for her to engage. So that would probably, in my opinion, be the first step on what we would want to do. But that's why we have our practices set up the way that we have them. And then we provide a layer of program management if you want to look at it more holistically. So Susannah, I'll kick it over to you to give your.
Yeah, no, I think you answered it well. I think, we've seen a lot of different client profiles at this point. So we can certainly, look at a client and kind of benchmark against what we're seeing as best practices and kind of help them define their own strategy. That's certainly something that we could do, both from a financially and technical perspective.
Is there any insights about what you would consider like a low level of maturity? I just want to make sure that I'm not missing something on the question.
It's not, it varies. So, certain organizations have a single resource managing IT spend, but that resource is, a rock star, and he or she is able to kind of keep it in control. It's obviously not the most scalable solution, but some folks have it in hand and they know how to report. I mean, ultimately the whole theme of this entire conversation really comes down to transparency. If you're able to have a single resource that's able to effectively communicate the financial stats to the business and they can make informed decisions, and that's awesome. But if not, we can say, we've seen client X use this tool, this is what it provides, does that align with your skill set? Like, we can do some cross comparing of clients, of course, in a sanitized way to help kind of drive. And do you need to go hire additional resources, or do you want to outsource it to us? I mean, we have certain clients that are outsourcing a large portion, or looking to outsource a large portion of their IT finance organization. So that's certainly an option too. It just kind of depends on what they're looking to do and the budget associated with it.
So typically another thing that we're challenging our clients on is, what position do you want to take right now? Do you want to be weathering the storm on just keeping steady while we have a little bit of uncertainty going on right now? Or do we still need to be disruptive? Do we still need to be moving and being innovative and accelerating and doing those things?
Yeah.
And we just firmly believe right now that the only way that you're going to continue to free up the money that's needed to go disrupt and be innovative is things like FinOps, right? We have to find money in other areas that aren't being optimized to go give you that innovation fund that you're going to need to go do these engagements. So, but we feel very confident that we have examples. And that's probably the other question I would have for you, Susannah, is Susannah's team has an unbelievable track record of when her team gets engaged on these, not only does it help you with your documentation that you're going to need, but we get real savings out of it that we can use. So it's kind of like the double victory lap of, hey, I need this documentation for this cool project, but I've also freed up some additional money that can go work on these other 2 projects that I would like to get to that are innovative. So if there's any comments there, but I wanted to throw that out there as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely happy to provide any sort of documentation. I think we have some out on ahead.com as it is. I do a couple demos walking through specific models related to a couple of the use cases we talked about today. But I'd say, if you have something specific in mind or want to see just, use case sort of, win wires associated with, what we accomplished and how projects are going, et cetera, obviously happy to provide those as well. So please just reach out if we can be of assistance there.
And what are the size of the organizations that you've done this with? I just want to make sure that this isn't like, 100-person organization.
I'd say, we've done it anywhere from startups all the way up to, really large global corporations. Again, it depends on what they're trying to accomplish. Are we augmenting or creating a financial function that doesn't exist today? Or do they have a really robust financial team globally, but they're laser focused on another project and they just need help to move faster or to enable them to do certain things? And we do that too. So it's across the board.
I'll just give a last quick call if someone wants to be speedy typer here and throw a last question in. But we do not have anything else that's there. I will say to close out, one, really appreciate everybody's time. We are recording this, so the purpose would be is to get this out. Someone did ask a question about like the content being shared. That's obviously our intent, is to get this out to people. For specifically, if there's team members that couldn't make this call, hopefully this was a very direct and informative kind of conversation. We'd welcome feedback afterwards to improve. Obviously, that's what we're trying to do. But with that being said, we just would like to thank all of you for your time and participation in this webinar. So
absolutely. Thank you all. Really much appreciate it.
Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.